Harrison Shen had never imagined that his name would be spoken in the royal chambers of an alien civilization. Yet here he stood not as a prisoner, but as something else entirely. The events that had led him to this moment still felt surreal, like fragments of a dream he couldn't quite piece together. It had begun 3 months ago when the diplomatic vessel Horizon's Promise crash-landed on the ice moon of Keras 7. Harrison, a search and rescue specialist with the United Earth Coalition, had been part of the recovery team sent to investigate. What they found defied all protocols and expectations. The wreckage belonged to the Valkyrie, a species humanity had only recently made first contact with, a species ruled by a matriarchal hierarchy, with an almost mythical queen at its apex. The crash site was a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen atmosphere. Harrison's team moved through the debris with practiced efficiency, scanning for survivors. The Valkyrie were an imposing species, tall, with luminescent skin that shifted between deep purples and blues, and eyes that seemed to hold the depth of ancient oceans. Their diplomatic mission had been one of cautious optimism, a bridge between two civilizations still learning each other's languages. Contact. I've got a life sign. Lisa Martinez, Harrison's partner and the team's medical officer, called out from inside a collapsed section of the hull. Harrison rushed to her position, his breath fogging inside his helmet despite the suit's temperature regulation. What they found changed everything. A Valkyrie child no more than equivalent to a human 6-year-old was trapped beneath a support beam, her small body barely moving. But it was who she was that made Harrison's blood run cold. The insignia on her clothing, the ceremonial markings on her brow. This was no ordinary passenger. This was royalty. Harrison, the structural integrity is failing, Lisa warned, her scanner flashing red. We have maybe 90 seconds before this whole section collapses. The beam was too heavy for their equipment, and calling for additional support would take too long. Harrison looked at the child's face. Her large eyes were open, watching him with a mixture of fear and fading hope. In that moment, species didn't matter. Protocol didn't matter. All that existed was a child who needed help. Get ready to pull her out, Harrison said, positioning himself beneath the beam. Harrison, you can't, your suit won't handle that pressure. But he was already moving. Harrison wedged himself into position, using every ounce of strength augmented by his exosuit's servos. The beam groaned, shifted. Alarms screamed in his helmet as the suit's structural warnings maxed out. Pain lanced through his shoulders and spine, but the beam lifted just inches. But enough. Now, Lisa. Now, Lisa pulled the child free just as Harrison's suit gave way with a sickening crack. He collapsed, the beam crashing down where the child had been moments before. Through blurred vision, he saw Lisa carrying the small Valkyrie toward safety, saw the ceiling beginning its final collapse. He didn't remember much after that. Fractured images of rescue, of medical bays, of surgeries to repair his shattered vertebrae. When he finally woke 3 weeks later, the first face he saw wasn't human. Queen Shalara stood beside his medical pod, her imposing 7-foot frame somehow seeming gentle in the sterile light. Her skin shimmered with colors he had no names for, and her eyes, those ancient, knowing eyes, held something Harrison couldn't quite identify. You saved my daughter, she said, her voice like wind through crystal caves. The translator embedded in his neural implant converted her words, but couldn't quite capture the emotion beneath them. The physicians tell me you should not have survived, that what you did was impossible by human standards. Harrison tried to speak, but his throat was raw. She held up a hand. Among my people, there is a term Velshakor. It means soul brother, but that translation fails to capture its true meaning. It speaks of one who proves themselves through sacrifice, who demonstrates that the bonds of compassion transcend the boundaries of species. She paused, and Harrison saw something shimmer in her eyes. Were those tears? You are no longer simply human to me, Harrison Chen. You are Velshakor. You are family. Over the following months, as Harrison underwent rehabilitation, he learned what that meant. The Valkyrie were a deeply honor-bound species, and the Queen's declaration had ripples far beyond simple gratitude. He was granted access to areas of their society few outsiders ever witnessed. He met the child he'd saved, Princess Kaylara, whose recovery had been complete, and who now spoke of him with a reverence that made him deeply uncomfortable. Lisa visited often, bringing news from Earth and updates on the diplomatic progress. That had accelerated dramatically after the incident. "You've become a symbol," she told him one day, a wry smile on her face. "The human who proved we're capable of seeing beyond ourselves." No pressure or anything, but it was Queen Shalara's continued presence that most surprised him. She would sit with him during therapy sessions, sharing stories of her people's history, their values, their fears about meeting humanity. "We were cautious," she admitted once, "because we had encountered other species who saw kindness as weakness, who measured worth by utility rather than spirit. But you showed us that humanity possesses something we value. Above all else, the courage to be compassionate even when it costs everything." Now, standing in the royal chamber as the formal ceremony concluded, Harrison wore robes that blended human and Valkyrie designs, a gift from the queen herself. The title she had bestowed upon him came with responsibilities he was still learning to understand, but also with a profound sense of purpose. "You changed how we see your species," Queen Shalara said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder in a gesture that transcended cultural barriers. "And perhaps more importantly, you reminded us why such gestures matter. My daughter lives because you saw her not as alien, but simply as someone who needed help." Harrison looked at Princess Kalara, who stood beside her mother, her young face bright with that particular joy children possess. She waved at him, and he waved back. "I just did what anyone should do," Harrison said finally. "Perhaps," the queen replied, her colors shifting to warm golds and ambers. "But you did what many would not. And that, Harrison Chen, is why you will never be merely human to us again. You are something more. You are a reminder that the best of us can bridge any distance, any difference, through simple acts of courage and love." As Harrison left the chamber that day, with Lisa waiting to escort him back to the human delegation, he realized that saving one child had somehow saved something larger, the hope that two vastly different species might truly understand one another, not through treaties or technology, but through the universal language of compassion that needed no translation at all.